listening and watching Rashkin Report. This is Yuri Rashkin, and my guest today is head of Litvinenko Fund, Alexander Goldfarb, who's joining us from New York. Alex, welcome back to the program.
Hi.
Hello. Well, let's begin with impeachment. We have this trial in the Senate. I think we can agree that impeachment has occurred, but now there's a trial. You're an attorney. You're observing this. You have kind of a different perspective, being able to compare this to how things are done in Russia. But what do you think about this impeachment so far?
Well, it's kind of anticlimactic because nothing new has so far emerged. Everybody expected that there might be a small fraction of Republican senators who would vote with Democrats, at least on the subject of calling witnesses, but it appears that these hopes would not materialize. And the Senate will acquit Trump. And then the ultimate decision on where America would go and what will happen with this presidency will take place in November at the general election. So far, the opinion of voters, judging by the polls, is split exactly 50-50, whether Trump should go or whether Trump should stay.
Does it really matter whether it's 50-50 or whether it's number of really states and senators from which states they come from? Because we know that it doesn't, like there's a lot of people in California, way more than in Midwest and some other states, but they still have two senators. So is it about the country or is it about the way the Senate is created?
Well, both. Of course, the opinion of the country affects the situation in the states, but both with regard to specific individual senators and with regard to the general election, some states have much more weight than the others. And particularly because there are a very well-known group of red Republican states and a group of Democratic states, and they constitute the bulk of the electoral votes here. But there is several, some people think 6, some people think 8 or 10 swing states where the outcome of the election may be different. Sometimes they vote Republican, sometimes they vote Democratic, and within those states there is a section of the electorate which is swinging electorate, and it is these people who essentially will decide the outcome of the elections. And with regard to senators from these states, this is important more than senators from, let's say, the state of New York, who are always Democrats.
Right. We have a senator from Alaska that has a lot of clout and importance, but Alaska, I mean, few people live there. What do you think is the impression from Kremlin of what is going on here, in a sense that, obviously they're pulling for Trump, but does the outcome of this really even matter for a propaganda machine that's already working and preparing us to vote a certain way in November 2020? Do facts matter? Does reality even matter?
The reality matters to an extent. The reality matters and myth matters. And as I said, the outcome of the elections depends on a very small group on people in a limited number of states, the so-called swing vote in swing states, and the targeted propaganda from Russia or from the candidates directed to these particular voters may decide the outcome of the election, even if the bulk of the population votes in a particular way, as we have seen in 2016 when Hillary Clinton won by 3 million votes, but Trump won by electoral votes precisely because the voters in these swing states had more weight than the general vote in the country.
Right. Alex, you're not known as a flaming liberal. I think you're known as a pretty conservative individual, but I don't at the same time hear you as being a strong supporter of President Trump. So, and I think there's a kind of understanding that the Republican Party has kind of become the party of Trump. How do you think that affects the dynamic on the world stage, the role that Republicans have historically played? Where is this headed now?
Well, I would classify myself as a centrist who doesn't have a particular affiliation with either right or left. I'm very negative about Trump because I consider him simply a crook, a dishonest man who, through political manipulation and exploiting fears and prejudices of a certain segment of the population, some economic, some religious, some racial, managed to get under his control the grassroots levels of Republican Party and pushed the former leadership and establishment of Republicans out of control. So people like the late John McCain or the Bushes or Mitt Romney, the former candidate of Republicans, they have no control over the party now, and it has indeed become the party of Trump, very conservative, populist, not very enlightened, and this is a tragedy of this party. Maybe after Trump it will return back to the traditional Republican kind of mainstream. In the meantime, I should say that Democrats are swinging so much to the left, and this trend is represented by Bernie Sanders and the, let's say, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman from New York, who are too left to my taste, and whose plans, although maybe well-intended, might destroy the economy, which in the end will turn out worse than Yuri.
Yep. Okay. So I will continue. So I will just reply to your point about Ocasio-Cortez. I wonder if we really would have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the scene if we didn't have Trump to begin with, because I think that he was such a strong effect on the body politic that there would have to be an anti-Trump, just reaction to the strong change of flavor that he went from what we have historically known as mainstream Republicans to now the party of Trump. And I think that's part of the reason that we have more extreme politicians saying stronger things on the left as a result of that. But my question for you next is, Alex, there is certain similarity, it seems, between Trump supporters and Russians in kind of in terms of more values, because Trump supporters tend to be more conservative, and Russians tend to be more conservative. Are Russians more conservative, or are they being told to be more conservative now, or how does that work?
Well, the difference between Trump and the Putin is in details. And the details are that Putin managed to put mass media totally under control, number one. Number two is that internet is not as influential in Russia as it is in the United States. So imagine if Trump was able to seize control over CNN, ABC, NBC, New York Times, and Washington Post. And the only thing that would have remained would be the conservative media and Fox News and so on. I can assure you that the 50 or 43% of supporters which he has now would immediately double, people, essentially, people's views are shaped by mass media. And I wouldn't say that the Russians are much more different than the electorate of Trump. The only difference is that the Russians of that persuasion are 90 or 95%. And in America, it's only 43%. And that's because, of course, of the state control over the media.
Alex, a couple of other things I wanted to ask you. Number one, you're personally familiar with George Soros. You've worked for him in the past. He's now just announced that he's going to set aside $1 billion for development of democracy efforts worldwide, so that people just don't lose taste for this democracy thing. What do you think could be the effect of this? Back when you worked for him in the 90s, helping protect and make sure that Russian science survives, you were very successful at the time and made very substantial impact. But over time, it seems like those efforts didn't necessarily were sustained because obviously Soros, those efforts were put to an end by Russian government very specifically. And now we can say, was there impact? Wasn't there impact? What do you think about this latest initiative? I mean, George Soros is a pretty successful man, but yet he keeps investing into democracy. Is this a losing product?
Well, democracy generally appears to be on the retreat in the world. And it's very good that George puts his money into maintaining whatever he can maintain from the democratic outlook in those countries around the world and in the United States. His role, of course, is a bit exaggerated because he is not only the source of funding, but he's also a symbol for many people. So including the camp of Trump, who use the demonic figure of Soros to scare simple folk in the street. Yes, but what can I say? He is a force of good. He's always been a force of good. But his influence as a rich sponsor of liberal projects is much more exaggerated. In the West, at least, the public and politicians have much more influence than sponsors of this or that particular movement.
So we talk about George Soros, and then he keeps trying to do things, but his influence is maybe overstated.
That's what I think. Yes, he's not alone. There are many. I mean, if you look at American foundations, there are Ford Foundation and Carnegie and others who work around the world, and there's the government programs, and all of them support democracy. But Soros was very influential in particular regions of the world when he focused at a particular time. For example, during the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, he supported the Orange Camp, and so on. So Soros is very good and very important, but his influence is proportional essentially to the amount of money he spends. And $1 billion in the general scheme of things is a tiny fraction of what is being spent on propaganda and on social programs.
That's interesting. So what I'm hearing you say is that all this animosity towards Soros isn't necessarily maybe driven by ideology and I would say anti-Semitism, because all these other players that you named, they're not specifically Jewish and are not associated with being Jewish, and therefore they're not, they seem to escape some harsh criticism that George Soros has been subjected to over time. But at the same time, what I'm hearing you say is that he's actually just getting involved in situations that may create more animosity because he's like sticking his neck out for things, and therefore he's getting attacked. Is that what you're saying?
No, this is not what I'm saying.
All right.
There's a very strong anti-Semitic element in using Soros as a demonic figure in the center of a conspiracy theory. Something akin to the role Rockefellers played in the beginning of the century. Nazis, for example, and other anti-Semites used this, archetype figure of a Jewish plutocrat who is plotting against the people. And the same thing is happening here. What I'm saying is that Soros is doing great work with his money for the benefit of the humankind and for the liberal ideas, but his influence, real influence, is much less than what is attributed to him by the conspiracy theorists who chose him as a demonic symbol of some sort of forces that are controlling the world. He's not controlling the world.
All right, Alex, one more question before we wrap up, and that is, in Russia there is conversation about changing constitution. Fundamentally, it seems like the goal is to make sure that Vladimir Putin can stay in power for as long as he wants to, but there's some other things being changed, and there's kind of a confusion, because on some level people are saying, oh my gosh, this is a constitution, we need to protect it, and on the other hand, people are going, well, it hasn't been really respected in like decades, what to do. So what are your thoughts about this process of, the only thing that we hear here in the West, sometimes it seems, Putin's government resigned, and we just are sitting here piecing it together, trying to figure out what any of this means. So what does these big constitutional changes mean to you? Does it mean that Russia is trying to, modernize itself as a state? Or do you think that this is Vladimir Putin's approach to how to stay in power? And is this worth fighting for this constitution, this document, or is it, who cares? This is a dictatorship is a dictatorship, and this is a piece of paper.
I think that what's happening with the resignation of the government and changes into constitutions, these are maneuvering of Putin and his regime to somehow stabilize the system of government, system of controlling the situation in anticipation of 2024 when Putin's term ends. How to make sure that he and his clique remains in power. And these are minor changes to what is happening there. They hope that this will help them consolidate their hold on power. But since it is not aimed at granting democratic freedoms and liberties, these changes, to the Russian people, it won't change much. What might change the Russian situation is the economic situation in Russia, the Western sanctions for sure, and the general policy of the West, at least until Trump, to isolate Russia, and how much internet can shape people's views as opposed to the state-controlled traditional mainstream media.
Alex, you place a lot of importance on the outside efforts in controlling Russian regimes, at least attempts for influencing worldwide events. But do you feel that this is something that can only occur after Donald Trump leaves office, or do you think that it is possible to put pressure on Russia while Donald Trump is still in office?
No, there is pressure on Russia going on.
But he always looks for a way to seemingly diffuse
Trump,
it.
Well, many people said that there are two kinds of parallel American foreign policy towards Russia, which was absolutely obvious in the impeachment hearings, where the rank-and-file diplomats and even former members of Trump's administration, such as John Bolton, for example, or former Chief of Staff Kelly, General Kelly, appeared to pursue a policy towards Russia contrary to what Trump has been saying and doing. So there is the policy is unclear, but the pressure continues.
But as we see, John Bolton is now unemployed, and
Yeah.
John Kelly is unemployed, and Donald Trump still has a job and still makes all these decisions, right?
That is true, but there's still Senate and Congress, and with regard to Russia, there is still a consensus that Russia should be contained. Even within the Republican Party, who would support Trump, even his staunchest supporters, such as Senator Lindsey Graham, when it comes to Russia and sanctions, opposes Trump. So it is a complex situation. But what I'm saying, if you look at it from the Russian side, Russian standpoint, the pressure from the West works, and it's painful. And this is what they are feeling. They do not feel some cosmetic changes in the constitution, which hasn't been working in the first place. But they feel Western pressure, and they feel economic pressure. They feel the problems with finding investments or borrowing money. In the West, they feel oil prices. That's why they're so happy when oil prices go up, and so on. And they generally feel that America and the West in general is an existential threat, even if they pursue the most pro-Russian policies, because of their system of government and the role of the society in the government. So even if Americans did nothing, actually this is what understood people in the end of World War II, who developed the containment doctrine, that whatever you do, however friendly you are, however you appease the regime, the Soviet regime at the time, it will still feel threatened by the West, because it's a more efficient and more sympathetic system than the ones that they have at home. So in that sense, the competition and pressure on Russia is a major threat to that regime.
All right. Alex Goldfarb, head of Litvinenko Fund, thank you so much for being on Rashkin Report with us today. And let's see where things go. This has been Yuri Rashkin, and thanks for watching. Take care.
Thank you.